A widowed millionaire visits an orphanage in search of an heir, and everyone is surprised by his behavior. In the luxurious mansion in the exclusive area of Lomas de Chapultepec in Mexico City, Emiliano Montero watched the sunset with melancholy from his large balcony. At 50 years old, this technology industry magnate had it all: an enviable fortune, international recognition, and a life full of comforts. However, his eyes reflected a deep emptiness that not even all the money in the world could fill. It had been exactly 1 year since Luciana, his beloved wife, had died in a tragic car accident on the Cuernavaca highway. Since then, Emiliano wandered the corridors of his mansion like a soul in pain, unable to find solace in the luxuries that surrounded him. "Mr. Montero, dinner is served," announced Dolores, the housekeeper, who had been with the family for more than 2 decades. Emiliano nodded without enthusiasm and headed for the dining room. The enormous table for 12 only accentuated his loneliness. As he listlessly sampled the dishes prepared by his personal chef, his mind wandered to memories of the laughter-filled, love-filled dinners he used to share with Luciana. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" asked Dolores, when she saw that he had barely touched the food. "No, Dolores, thank you. You may go," answered Emiliano with a sigh. That night, like so many others since Luciana's departure, Emiliano could not sleep. He tossed and turned in the king-size bed that now seemed too big for him alone. In a fit of desperation, he got up and went to the study. He turned on the computer and began to surf the internet aimlessly, looking for something to fill the emptiness that was consuming him. It was then that an ad caught his attention. "Casa Esperanza, home for children without a family in Toluca." Emiliano stared at the screen. An idea was beginning to form in his mind. He and Luciana had always wanted to have children, but for reasons they never understood, they were unable to conceive. Now faced with this announcement, a spark of illusion ignited in his heart. "What if?" he muttered to himself, as his fingers typed rapidly for more information about the adoption process. As he read, Emiliano felt a new energy come over him. For the first time in a long time, he had a purpose, something that could give his life meaning again. He decided that the next day he would visit that orphanage in Toluca. Perhaps he thought he could offer some child the home and love he so longed to give. With this resolution, Emiliano finally fell asleep, dreaming of the possibility of a new family and a less lonely future. The next morning, Emiliano awoke with a determination he hadn't felt in months. He dressed carefully, choosing an elegant but not ostentatious outfit, and went down to breakfast with an unusual appetite. "Dolores, please tell Ramon to get the car ready. I will leave for Toluca," he announced as he finished his coffee. The housekeeper looked at him with surprise. It had been a long time since Mr. Montero had left the mansion of his own free will. "Of course, sir. Would you like me to prepare something for the road?" "That won't be necessary, thank you," Emiliano replied with a slight smile, his first in a long time. As the luxurious Mercedes-Benz drove down the highway to Toluca, Emiliano looked at the landscape with new eyes. The Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl volcanoes loomed majestically on the horizon, silent guardians of his journey to a new beginning. Arriving at Casa Esperanza, Emiliano was surprised by the modesty of the place. It was a 2-story building, painted in cheerful colors but faded by time. In the courtyard, some children were playing under the supervision of a couple of caretakers. Emiliano took a deep breath and headed for the entrance. A middle-aged woman with a friendly face and gray hair greeted him. "Welcome to Casa Esperanza. I am Guadalupe Sanchez, the director. How can I help you? Good morning, Mrs. Sanchez. I am Emiliano Montero," he introduced himself, noticing how the woman's eyes widened with recognition when she heard his name. "I would like information about the adoption process." Guadalupe invited him into her office, a small but cozy space decorated with children's drawings and photographs of smiling children. "Mr. Montero, I have to tell you that the adoption process is long and rigorous. We want to make sure that our children go to homes where they will be loved and properly cared for," Guadalupe explained. Emiliano nodded, understanding the seriousness of the matter. "I understand perfectly. I am willing to go through all the necessary processes. You see, a year ago I lost my wife and we have no children." I feel I have a lot of love to give, and I would like to give a child the opportunity to have a family. Guadalupe listened to him carefully, noting the sincerity in his words. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Montero. Would you like to meet some of our children? This does not imply any commitment, but it might give you an idea of what it means to be an adoptive parent. Emiliano readily agreed. He followed Guadalupe through the halls of the house, observing the shared rooms, the community dining room, and the classrooms where the children received basic education. Finally, they reached the backyard where several children were playing. Emiliano was overwhelmed by the curious glances that rested on him. Some children approached timidly, others watched him from afar. It was then that he saw him, a boy of about 10 years old, sitting alone under a tree reading a book. There was something in his posture, in the way he held the book, that seemed strangely familiar. "Who is that boy?" Emiliano asked, pointing discreetly. "Ah, that's Matteo," answered Guadalupe. "He is a very special boy. He came to us 8 years ago. He is intelligent and kind, but he tends to keep to himself." Emiliano felt an inexplicable attraction to the boy. Without a second thought, he approached him. "Hello, Matteo, what are you reading?" he asked in a soft voice. The boy looked up, and Emiliano felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Those eyes, they were identical to Luciana's. "The Little Prince," Matteo answered in a clear, melodious voice. "Have you read it, sir?" Emiliano nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally regained his voice, he said, "It's one of my favorite books. May I sit with you?" Matteo nodded, stepping aside to make room for him. As they talked about the book, Emiliano couldn't help but notice the boy's gestures and expressions, so similar to those of his late wife. At the end of the visit, Emiliano said goodbye to Matteo with his heart racing. Something had changed in him. It was no longer just the idea of adopting a child. He now felt an inexplicable connection with Matteo. Back in Guadalupe's office, Emiliano expressed his interest in starting the adoption process, specifically for Matteo. "Mr. Montero, I understand your enthusiasm, but I must warn you that the process can take months, even years," Guadalupe explained. "Besides, we cannot guarantee that you will be able to adopt a particular child." "I understand," Emiliano replied with determination. "I am willing to wait as long as it takes. There is something special about Matteo. I feel we are destined to be a family." As he signed the first documents to begin the process, Emiliano couldn't stop thinking about Matteo's eyes, so similar to Luciana's. Could there be a connection? He shook his head, dismissing the idea. Surely it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. What Emiliano didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever, unraveling secrets from the past and weaving new bonds for the future. The days following his visit to Casa Esperanza passed like a whirlwind for Emiliano. His mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of Matteo and the adoption process. He had hired the best law firm in Mexico City to expedite the paperwork, but even so, the wait seemed to take forever. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in his study, Emiliano found himself rambling again about the resemblance between Matteo and Luciana. He could not get out of his mind the idea that there was something more than a simple coincidence. Driven by a hunch, Emiliano went to the closet where he kept Luciana's most precious belongings. With trembling hands, he opened a box full of photographs and mementos. He spent hours going through each image, each letter, looking for something he didn't even know what it was. That's when she found it. At the bottom of the box, hidden among old postcards, was a yellowed envelope. Emiliano carefully opened it and extracted a letter dated 20 years ago. As he read it, his face paled. The letter was from Luciana, addressed to someone named Javier. In it, Luciana spoke of a secret we must keep and mentioned a baby. Emiliano felt the ground shift under his feet. Had Luciana had a child before she met him? With his heart racing, Emiliano continued to investigate. He spent the next few weeks immersed in a frantic search for answers. He hired private investigators, tracked down old contacts, and reviewed every detail of Luciana's life before her marriage. Meanwhile, he continued to visit Matteo at Casa Esperanza. Every time she saw the boy, the suspicion in her heart grew. The mannerisms, the way he spoke, even the way he frowned when he concentrated, all reminded her of Luciana. One afternoon during one of his visits, Matteo showed Emiliano his most prized possession, an old crumpled photograph. "It's my mother," Matteo said in a soft voice. "I don't remember her, but Mrs. Guadalupe says they left it for me when they brought me here." Emiliano took the photograph with trembling hands. It was Luciana, younger but unmistakably her. At that moment, all the pieces fell into place. That night, in the solitude of his mansion, Emiliano faced the truth he had discovered. Luciana, his beloved wife, had had a son before she met him. A son she had given up for adoption, and whose existence she had kept secret during all the years of their marriage. Emiliano's feelings were a whirlwind. On the one hand, he felt betrayed. How could Luciana have kept something so important from him? On the other hand, he understood the fear and pressure a young Luciana must have felt, facing an unplanned pregnancy in a conservative family. She spent entire nights reflecting, struggling with mixed feelings. Anger and disappointment mingled with the compassion and love he still felt for Luciana. And on top of it all, there was Matteo, that child who, unbeknownst to him, was the last link he had left with his wife. After weeks of internal struggle, Emiliano made a decision. Not only would he continue with the adoption process, but he would accelerate it. Matteo was not only the son he always wanted, he was Luciana's son, a part of her that was still alive. With renewed determination, Emiliano immersed himself in the adoption process. He used all his resources and connections to overcome the bureaucratic hurdles. At the same time, he began to prepare his home and his life for Matteo's arrival. However, Emiliano was aware that it would not be an easy road. How would he explain to Matteo the truth about his origin? How would he handle the inevitable questions about Luciana and the past? Meanwhile, at Casa Esperanza, Matteo was experiencing his own changes. Emiliano's regular visits had awakened in him a hope he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to dream of having a family. Guadalupe watched this development with a mixture of joy and concern. She was happy to see Matteo open up and smile more, but she feared the boy would get his hopes up too high. After all, the adoption process was long and complicated, and there were no guarantees. "Matteo, honey," Guadalupe told him one afternoon, "remember that Mr. Montero is in the adoption process, but that doesn't mean that—" "I know, Mrs. Guadalupe," Matteo interrupted with a smile, "but for the first time I feel that someone really sees me, not as just another orphan, but as me." Guadalupe hugged the boy, moved by his words and silently praying that this time fate would be kind to Matteo. Meanwhile, Emiliano faced his own challenges. He decided that before proceeding with the adoption, he should share the truth with the people closest to him. He organized a dinner party at his mansion and invited his sister Sofia and his best friend Ricardo. The night of the dinner, Emiliano was nervous. After the meal, he took them to his study and told them everything. The discovery about Luciana's past, Matteo's existence, and his decision to adopt him. Sofia listened in silence, tears in her eyes. When Emiliano finished, she stood up and hugged him tightly. "Luciana must be so proud of you, brother," she whispered. "You are doing the right thing." Ricardo, for his part, was more cautious. "Emiliano, my friend, are you sure about this? Adopting a child is a big responsibility, and with all this complicated past—" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Ricardo," Emiliano answered firmly. "Matteo is part of Luciana, and now he will be part of me too." With his sister's support and his friend's reluctant acceptance, Emiliano felt stronger to face the challenges to come. The following months were a roller coaster of emotions. Emiliano divided his time between running his business, visiting Matteo at Casa Esperanza, and fighting the bureaucracy of the adoption system. Each visit to Matteo strengthened the bond between them. Emiliano discovered new similarities with Luciana in every gesture, in every word of the child. Sometimes this caused him a pang of pain, but more often it filled his heart with a bittersweet joy. One afternoon, while they were sharing an ice cream in the courtyard of Casa Esperanza, Matteo asked a question that took Emiliano by surprise. "Mr. Emiliano, do you believe in destiny?" Emiliano looked at him, intrigued. "Why do you ask, Matteo? Hides that—" The boy hesitated for a moment. "Sometimes I feel as if I knew him before, as if we were destined to meet. Is it silly to think like that? Emiliano felt a lump in his throat. No, Matteo, it's not silly at all. I feel the same way. That night, back at his mansion, Emiliano made a decision. It was time to speed up the process. He called his lawyers and gave them clear instructions. Do whatever it takes, but get the adoption finalized as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in another part of Mexico City, a figure from the past was about to reappear, threatening to destabilize Emiliano's plans and Matteo's future. Javier Robles, the man mentioned in Luciana's letter, had returned to Mexico after years abroad. By chance, he learned of Luciana's death and, moved by guilt and curiosity, he began to investigate the son they had had together so many years before. His inquiries led him to Casa Esperanza in Toluca. With his heart racing, Javier showed up one morning at Guadalupe Sanchez's office. "Good morning, Mrs. Sanchez," he said in a trembling voice. "My name is Javier Robles, and I think my son might be here. I think my son might be here." Guadalupe looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Señor Robles, do you have any proof of what you are saying?" Javier took out of his pocket an old photograph identical to the one Matteo treasured. "This is the mother of my son. Her name was Luciana Vega." Guadalupe's face paled. She knew that photo. She had seen it hundreds of times in Matteo's hands. And now the man who claimed to be the boy's biological father was in front of her, just when Emiliano Montero's adoption process was in its final stage. The orphanage director was faced with an ethical and legal dilemma that could change the fate of everyone involved. What should she do? Inform Emiliano, tell Matteo, or keep the secret and go ahead with the adoption? While Guadalupe struggled with these questions, Emiliano and Matteo, oblivious to the coming storm, continued to build their relationship, dreaming of the future they would share as father and son. The news of Javier Robles' appearance fell like a bombshell in the quiet routine that had been established between Emiliano and Matteo. Guadalupe, after much reflection and consultation with the orphanage's lawyers, decided that the right thing to do was to inform all parties involved. One sunny Sunday morning, when Emiliano arrived at Casa Esperanza for his weekly visit with Matteo, Guadalupe intercepted him before he could see the boy. "Señor Montero, I need to speak with you in private," she said in a tone that immediately put Emiliano on alert. In Guadalupe's office, Emiliano listened with growing anguish to Javier Robles' story and his claim about Matteo. Each word was like a dagger in his heart, threatening to destroy the future he had imagined with the boy. What does this mean for the adoption process?" Emiliano asked, his voice barely a whisper. Guadalupe sighed deeply. "Legally, if it is confirmed that Mr. Robles is Matteo's biological father and he decides to claim his parental rights, he could stop the adoption." Emiliano felt the world collapsing around him. All his plans, all his hopes, seemed to vanish in an instant. But then he thought of Matteo, of the connection they had formed, of the unspoken promise he had made to give him a home. "No," she said firmly, surprising Guadalupe. "I will not give up on Matteo. I will fight for him if I have to." Meanwhile, oblivious to the storm that loomed over his future, Matteo waited anxiously in the courtyard. When he finally saw Emiliano leave Guadalupe's office, he noticed immediately that something was not right. "Is something wrong, Mr. Emiliano?" asked the boy, his voice tinged with concern. Emiliano knelt down in front of Matteo, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Matteo, there is something important I need to tell you. But first, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. Do you understand?" Matteo nodded, his big eyes full of confusion and a little fear. With all the care and gentleness he could muster, Emiliano explained to Matteo about Javier Robles' appearance. He watched as the boy's eyes widened in surprise, as his little body tensed at the news that his biological father had appeared. "Does that mean you're not going to adopt me anymore?" Matteo asked, his voice cracking. "No, Matteo," Emiliano answered firmly. "It means we'll have to fight a little longer, but I promise I'll do everything in my power to keep us together." That night, back at his mansion, Emiliano could not sleep. His mind was spinning, trying to find a solution. Finally, he made a decision. He called his lawyers and gave them clear instructions. They were to prepare for a legal battle if necessary. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emiliano met with his lawyers, preparing legal strategies. At the same time, he continued to visit Matteo, determined to keep their bond strong despite the uncertainty. Meanwhile, Javier Robles was not willing to sit idly by. He hired his own legal team and began lobbying for his rights as the biological father. The situation became more tense with each passing day. In the midst of this conflict, Matteo became increasingly confused and frightened. On the one hand, there was the security and affection that Emiliano offered him. On the other, the natural curiosity to know his biological father, to understand where he came from. Guadalupe, seeing the stress that this whole situation was causing Matteo, decided to intervene. She arranged a meeting with Emiliano and Javier in the hope that they could reach an agreement that would benefit the child. On the day of the meeting, the tension in Guadalupe's office was palpable. Emiliano and Javier looked at each other with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. After all, they had both loved the same woman, albeit at different times in their lives. "Gentlemen," Guadalupe began, "I have gathered you here because I think it is time for you to think about what is best for Matteo. This legal battle is only causing distress to the child." Javier was the first to speak. I know I have been absent all my life from Matteo, but when I learned of his existence, I knew I had to meet him. He is my son, my blood." Emiliano felt anger boiling up inside him, but he restrained himself. "Mr. Robles, I understand your position, but Matteo needs stability. He needs a home. I've been building a relationship with him for months. I know him, I know what he likes, what scares him. Can you say the same?" The discussion went on for hours. There were moments of tension, moments of pent-up emotion, but as they talked, both Emiliano and Javier began to realize that they had more in common than they thought. They both wanted the best for Matteo. Finally, after much deliberation, they reached a tentative agreement. Emiliano would proceed with the adoption, but Javier would have regular visitation rights. They would work together to make sure Matteo had all the love and support he needed. When Matteo was told of the decision, he surprised everyone with his reaction. Instead of rejoicing, he seemed more confused than ever. "But who's my real daddy?" he asked, looking alternately at Emiliano and Javier. It was Emiliano who knelt down in front of Matteo, taking his small hands in his. "Matteo, family is not always about blood. It's about love, about caring, about being there for each other. Javier is your biological father, and he will always be an important part of your life. But I am also your father because I choose you every day, because I love you as if you were my own blood." Javier, moved by Emiliano's words, joined them. "Matteo, I know it's confusing, but you're lucky, you know. You have two parents who love you and who will do everything they can to see you happy." Little by little, Matteo began to understand and accept his new reality. The next few days were a time of adjustment for everyone. Emiliano and Javier had to learn to coexist in Matteo's life, sometimes stumbling, but always with the child's best interest in mind. Meanwhile, the adoption process ran its course. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, but Emiliano remained steadfast in his commitment. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the day they had waited so long for arrived. On a sunny spring morning, Emiliano, Matteo, and Javier appeared before the judge. The courtroom was packed. Sofia, Ricardo, Guadalupe, and several children and staff from Casa Esperanza had come to witness this special moment. When the judge pronounced the words that made the adoption official, Emiliano felt his heart would burst with happiness. He hugged Matteo, now officially his son, with tears in his eyes. "Welcome home, my son," he whispered. Javier, though with mixed emotions, came over and hugged them both. "Congratulations, both of you," he said sincerely. As they walked out of the courthouse, Matteo walking between Emiliano and Javier, holding their hands, Emiliano couldn't help but think of Luciana. He could almost feel her there, smiling, approving of this strange but beautiful family that had been formed. The road had not been easy, and he knew there would still be challenges ahead. But looking at Matteo, seeing his smile, Emiliano knew it had all been worth it. The void in his heart, which once seemed insurmountable, was now filled with a new and different, but equally powerful love. That night, at the Montero mansion, there was a great celebration. Friends, family, and loved ones gathered to officially welcome Matteo into the family. Amid laughter, music, and congratulations, Emiliano watched his son move with increasing confidence among the guests. At one point during the party, Emiliano found himself alone with Javier on the terrace. Both men looked at each other, aware of how much their relationship had changed in such a short time. "Thank you," Javier finally said, breaking the silence, "for loving Matteo, for giving him the home I could not." Emiliano nodded, feeling that he could finally see Javier not as a rival, but as an ally in Matteo's well-being. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of his life," Emiliano replied. "Matteo is lucky to have you, too." The two men shared a smile of mutual understanding before returning to the party. The next few months were a period of adjustment for everyone. Emiliano had to learn to balance his life as a businessman with his new role as a single father. Matteo, meanwhile, was adjusting to his new life in the luxurious Montero mansion, so different from the modest Casa Esperanza. Javier, true to his promise, remained present in Matteo's life. They established a routine of regular visits, and little by little, a genuine relationship began to blossom between biological father and son. However, not everything was perfect. Matteo, despite his obvious happiness, was sometimes withdrawn and melancholy. Emiliano noticed that the boy spent a lot of time looking at Luciana's old photograph. One night, after putting Matteo to bed, Emiliano stood in the doorframe watching his son. The boy held Luciana's photo, gently tracing the outline of her face with one finger. "You miss her, don't you?" Emiliano asked softly, entering the room. Matteo nodded with tears in his eyes. Sometimes I wish I could remember her." "What was she like, Papa?" Emiliano felt a lump in his throat. It was the first time Matteo had ever called him Papa. He sat down on the bed next to his son and hugged him. "Your mother was the most wonderful person I've ever known," he began, his voice charged with emotion. "She was kind, intelligent, and had a laugh that could light up a room." For the next hour, Emiliano shared stories about Luciana with Matteo. He talked about how they met, about their walks through Coyoacán, about how she loved to dance in the rain. With each story, Matteo seemed to absorb a little more of the essence of the mother he never knew. "Do you think she would be happy that we are together?" Matteo asked at last, his eyes heavy with sleep. Emiliano kissed his son's forehead. "I'm sure she's smiling down from heaven, honey." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Matteo began to open up more, to ask more questions about his mother and about his own history. Emiliano, with occasional help from Javier, struggled to answer honestly, tailoring the answers to what a boy Matteo's age could understand. Meanwhile, life went on. Emiliano immersed himself in his role as a father with the same enthusiasm and dedication he put into his business. He learned to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, bandage scraped knees, and chase imaginary monsters out from under the bed. Javier, for his part, found his place in this unconventional family dynamic. His visits became expected moments for both Matteo and himself. Sometimes he would take Matteo to soccer games or to the movies. Other times they would simply spend the afternoon playing in the park. One day, while Emiliano was working in his studio, he heard laughter coming from the garden. Looking out the window, he saw Matteo and Javier playing soccer. For a moment he felt a pang of jealousy, but then he realized how lucky Matteo was to have so much love in his life. As time passed, Emiliano began to notice changes in himself. He no longer felt lonely or empty. His life, which once seemed to lose all meaning with Luciana's death, was now full of purpose and joy. However, not everything was rosy. There were challenges, like the first time Matteo had a nightmare and Emiliano didn't know how to comfort him. Or when the boy had his first fight at school and Emiliano had to learn to be firm while remaining understanding. One afternoon, while helping Matteo with his math homework, Emiliano realized how much he had grown as a father. "Dad," Matteo said suddenly, putting down his pencil, "do you think I'll ever have a mother?" The question took Emiliano by surprise. He had never considered the possibility of falling in love again after Luciana. "I don't know, son," he answered honestly. "But what I do know is that you and I are a family with or without a mother. Is that okay?" Matteo smiled and nodded, returning to his task. But the question kept echoing in Emiliano's mind. That night, after putting Matteo to bed, Emiliano found himself looking at old photos of Luciana. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel pain when he looked at them. Instead, he felt gratitude for the time they shared, and for the gift she had left him in Matteo. "Thank you, my love," she whispered to the photograph. "Thank you for showing us the way to each other." As the months passed, the relationship between Emiliano and Matteo grew stronger every day. Javier remained a constant and positive presence in their lives. The Montero mansion, which once seemed too big and empty, was now full of life and laughter. Emiliano had learned that love can come in the most unexpected ways, and that family does not always fit conventional definitions. With Matteo, he had found a new reason to live, to love, to move forward. And so, day by day, they built their new life together, facing the challenges that came their way and celebrating the small victories. The shadow of the past no longer weighed so heavily on them, and the future, though uncertain, seemed bright and full of possibilities. But fate still had some surprises in store for this peculiar family. Time flew by, and before they knew it, Matteo was celebrating his 13th birthday. The Montero mansion was filled with balloons, streamers, and the hustle and bustle of dozens of excited teenagers. Emiliano watched proudly as his son, now a tall young man with an easy smile, interacted with his friends. Javier was also present at the celebration, bringing with him a special gift, a photo album he had created, filled with images of Luciana in her youth. Matteo received the gift with tears in his eyes, hugging both parents tightly. However, life was about to take an unexpected turn. A few weeks after the party, Emiliano received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Montero," said the voice on the other end of the line, "this is Dr. Alejandro Vega from the General Hospital of Mexico. We have a patient here who claims to be the sister of your late wife, Luciana Vega. She is gravely ill and has asked to see you and your son." Emiliano felt the world stop. A sister of Luciana's? In all their years together, Luciana had never mentioned having siblings. With his heart racing, he agreed to visit the hospital that same afternoon. She decided not to say anything to Matteo until she knew more about the situation. She called Javier and asked him to watch the boy while he went to the hospital. Javier, sensing the urgency in Emiliano's voice, asked no questions and agreed immediately. At the hospital, Emiliano was taken to a private room. There, on a bed surrounded by machines and monitors, lay a woman who was the spitting image of Luciana, only a few years older. Her name was Carmen Vega. "Emiliano," the woman whispered in a weak voice, "thank you for coming. I know you must have many questions." Over the next few hours, Carmen told Emiliano a story that stunned him. She and Luciana were actually identical twins, separated at birth due to family complications. Carmen had been raised by aunts and uncles in Guadalajara, while Luciana stayed with her parents in Mexico City. The sisters had been reunited shortly before Luciana met Emiliano, but had decided to keep their relationship a secret due to long-standing family tensions. Carmen explained that she respected Luciana's wish not to involve Emiliano in this complicated family history. "But now," Carmen said, her voice cracking with emotion, "I'm running out of time. I have a terminal illness and—" She paused, gathering her strength. "I have a daughter, Aurora. She is the same age as Matteo. She has no one else in the world." Emiliano felt short of breath. Not only was he discovering that Luciana had a twin sister, but now there was a niece, a cousin for Matteo, who needed a home. "What are you asking, Carmen?" Emiliano asked, although deep down he already knew the answer. "I know it's a lot to ask," Carmen answered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "But could you take care of Aurora when I'm gone? She is all I have left of Luciana, of our family." Emiliano left the hospital that night with his head spinning. How was he going to explain all this to Matteo and to Javier? Was he prepared to take care of another child, especially a teenager? When he got home, he found Matteo and Javier playing video games in the living room. The scene of normalcy contrasted sharply with the whirlwind of emotions he felt inside. "Matteo, Javier," she said, her voice more serious than she intended, "we need to talk." For the next hour, Emiliano told them everything he had discovered. He saw Matteo's eyes widen in amazement as he heard about his aunt and cousin. Javier, for his part, listened in silence, his face a mask of worry. "So, I have a cousin? And is she coming to live with us?" Emiliano looked at Javier, seeking some kind of guidance. The other man nodded slightly, giving him his silent support. "Yes, if we all agree," Emiliano replied. "I know it's a big change, but it's great." Matteo interrupted, surprising both adults. "I've always wanted a sister. Well, a cousin is almost the same thing, isn't it?" Emiliano felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Matteo's immediate acceptance gave him the strength he needed to face this new challenge. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emiliano met with lawyers to begin Aurora's custody proceedings. Javier, once again demonstrating his unconditional support, offered to help in any way he could. Finally, the day came when Aurora would come to live with them. Carmen had quickly taken a turn for the worse and had to be permanently admitted to the hospital. Emiliano, Matteo and Javier went together to pick Aurora up. The girl they found was a teenage version of Luciana, with the same expressive eyes and shy smile. She was scared and sad, but when Matteo approached her and offered her a spontaneous hug, something in her seemed to relax. "Welcome to the family," Matteo said with a smile. The drive home was silent, each of them immersed in their own thoughts. Emiliano couldn't stop thinking about how much his life had changed in such a short time. From being a lonely and sad man, he now had an extended and complex family, full of love and challenges alike. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Emiliano found himself back on the terrace with Javier. "Do you think we can handle this?" Emiliano asked, doubt seeping into his voice for the first time. Javier put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll do it together, amigo. We're a family, remember? An unconventional one, but a family nonetheless." Emiliano smiled, grateful for Javier's constant presence in their lives. As they gazed at the city lights, both men realized they were on the verge of a new chapter in their lives, one full of challenges, but also of infinite possibilities. And so the Montero mansion, once filled with silence and solitude, now teemed with life, laughter, and yes, occasional chaos as well. Aurora's arrival brought a new dynamic to the family, challenging everyone to adapt and grow. The first few months with Aurora at home were a roller coaster of emotions. The young girl alternated between moments of deep sadness at the impending loss of her mother and flashes of joy at discovering her new family. Matteo, true to his word, enthusiastically assumed his role as almost brother. He spent hours showing Aurora around town, introducing her to his friends and teaching her the secrets of the Montero mansion. Their bond grew quickly, united by the shared loss of their mothers and the discovery of their family connection. Emiliano found himself navigating uncharted waters. Raising a teenager was already a challenge, but raising a teenage girl was entirely new territory. Aurora, though grateful, was often distant with him, as if afraid of becoming too attached. One night, as he was passing Aurora's room, Emiliano heard her crying softly. Without a second thought, he went in and sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you want to talk?" he asked softly. Aurora sat up, wiping her tears. "I miss her very much," she whispered. "Mom and Aunt Luciana, although I never knew her." Emiliano felt his heart shrink. "I miss her too," he said, referring to Luciana. "But you know, I think they would both be very happy to see us together now, as a family." For the first time since her arrival, Aurora approached Emiliano and hugged him. He held her while she cried, silently promising to do everything he could to make this brave young woman feel loved and safe. Meanwhile, Javier became an unexpected pillar for Aurora. His experience as a long-distance father with Matteo had given him a unique perspective, and he often acted as a bridge between Aurora and Emiliano. One day, as Javier was taking Aurora and Matteo to the movies, the girl asked him a question that took him by surprise. "Javier, do you think it's wrong that sometimes I feel happy here when my mom is so sick?" Javier looked at her tenderly. "Aurora, your mom wants you to be happy. Being happy doesn't mean that you love her less or that you are forgetting her. It's a gift she wants you to have." Those words seemed to release something in Aurora. From that day on, she allowed herself to enjoy her new life more, while still regularly visiting her mother in the hospital. The relationship between Emiliano and Javier also evolved. What began as a tense and potentially contentious situation had developed into a deep friendship and a partnership in child rearing. They often joked about being the most unlikely team of dads in Mexico. However, Not everything was easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of frustration. Aurora had her first fight with Matteo, leaving Emiliano and Javier puzzled about how to handle sibling conflict. Matteo, for his part, sometimes felt jealous of the attention Aurora received. It was during one of these family crises that Emiliano had an epiphany. He was trying to mediate between Aurora and Matteo after a heated argument when he suddenly realized this was exactly what he had always wanted. A loud, complicated, loving family. That night, after the waters had calmed down, Emiliano gathered everyone in the living room. "Family," he began, his voice charged with emotion. "I know we are not conventional. I know that sometimes it is difficult and complicated. But I want you to know that I wouldn't change any of this. I love you all and I am grateful for each and every one of you." Matteo was the first to respond, throwing himself into his father's arms. Aurora followed, more shyly at first, but soon joined in the embrace. Javier watched them with a smile until Emiliano extended an arm, inviting him to join in. "Come here," said Emiliano. "You're part of this madness too." And so, in the middle of the living room of the Montero mansion, 4 people that fate had brought together in the most unexpected ways embraced, forming a family that defied all conventions. Months passed, and Carmen's health continued to deteriorate. Aurora spent more and more time in the hospital, often accompanied by Emiliano, Matteo, or Javier. It was during one of these visits that Carmen, in a moment of clarity, took Emiliano's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for taking care of my little girl, for giving her the family Luciana and I always wanted to have." Emiliano felt tears in his eyes. "It is an honor, Carmen. Aurora is a gift just like Matteo." Soon after, Carmen passed away peacefully, surrounded by her new extended family. The grief was intense, especially for Aurora, but the young woman found comfort in the love and support of her new family. At the funeral, as he watched Aurora leaning on Matteo, with Javier standing protectively behind them both, Emiliano felt a familiar presence. He could almost see Luciana smiling, approving of the family they had formed. The following years brought new challenges and joys. Matteo and Aurora grew up, facing the ups and downs of adolescence together. Emiliano and Javier became experts at navigating the complexities of raising 2 teenagers, supporting each other every step of the way. The Montero mansion, once a symbol of Emiliano's loneliness and pain, had been transformed into a home full of life, love, and laughter. Photographs of Luciana and Carmen held a place of honor, reminding everyone of the twists of fate that had brought them together. One afternoon, years later, Emiliano was in his studio when he heard laughter coming from the garden. Peeking out, he saw Matteo and Aurora, now young adults, playing soccer with Javier. The scene filled his heart with indescribable joy. At that moment, Emiliano understood that the void he once felt in his life had not only been filled, but had been replaced by something bigger and more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. The love he shared with Luciana had not died with her. It had transformed and expanded, giving birth to this unique and wonderful family. As he watched his family, Emiliano whispered a silent thank you to fate, to Luciana, and to all the unexpected twists and turns that had brought him to this moment. Life had not turned out as he had planned, but somehow it had turned out even better. And so, in the warmth of the Mexican sunset, the Montero family continued their game, their laughter echoing in the air, a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and the ability of the human heart to grow and embrace the unexpected.